Good evening, Rush Nation, or if you are listening back to this, good morning, good afternoon, whenever it is that you are tuning in. We are, of course, live. It is the 5 Yard Rush Daily Fantasy Sports Show. You are joined by, I was going to say ever present, but that would be a lie. I'm not ever present. I have been absent in the past, but you're joined by me, Nick, and of course, the man to my right on my screen is Mr. Mark Ferguson, drinking from a lovely cup there, Mark, full of love hearts. Whoa, you chose the wrong time to drink from that cup then. Wow.
Yeah, well, so normally I think my mug choice through a little bit better than this, obviously. So, there you go. I know on the pod before the show before us, I know Liam and Rich are always drinking something hard or very manly and stuff and all that. And I've got a nice cup of tea and this nice
cup of love hearts. There we go. Look at that.
With my
Every colour
Emma
under the sun.
Bridgewater. You don't get Emma Bridgewater talk on any other DFS show.
No, you do not. Which, I mean, is there any more reason that you need to tune into this show on a weekly basis other than that? Absolutely not. Week 4 is in the books, Mark. We're moving on to week 5, and we're now at past the quarter stage in the season. Aren't we? We're 25% of the way through. The season's absolutely flying by, like it always does. Happy with your performance over the past week, Mark?
I'm not happy with my pod team. My pod team's had a bit of a mare. It's actually my worst team now out of my 4.
Oh, wow.
So it's gone from being my best to my worst. It's the other teams. It's more to do with the scores the other teams got, though. I had a lot of Corridor, Patterson and Hill. And it kind of shows how easy it is to move up the leaderboard at the moment, I think. Just have a player with a really good week, and I think you've always got a chance and stuff. So I've dropped down to 333 for the pod team. So only scored 113 points this week. So very disappointing. So changes are afoot.
I wish that my pod team was that high up in the rankings. My pod team dropped off an absolute cliff last week. I'm down in the 700s with the pod team now. My highest team is ranked in the 300s, but my lowest is, it's not my lowest, but the pod team is nestled in the middle of my entries at 700 plus, which is not ideal. Coming off a wild card, not the result I wanted. Some really low, below par performances. But I suppose the key really, Mark, for me is one of the things when I look back on how our teams started versus how they are now and the changes we've made. And we preached about it from the start, but I think one thing you need to remember in this kind of contest is patience is absolute key. And you can't be too knee-jerky with the decisions and transfers that you make, because I think NFL fantasy for me, Mark, it's different from any other fantasy contest, really, because yes, the scoring can be variant, but you tend to find that your top players will always rise. The cream will always rise. It's usually the same kind of players, season in, season out. The names aren't unfamiliar to us. So despite some poor performances early on, am I that surprised that in recent weeks we've had some good performances from the likes of, and I know the Jags haven't been great, but James Robinson, for example, since we had him in our team, since we transferred him out, has made a bit of a mockery of his price tag, and he's put up some good performances. We've just seen a massive week from Tyreek Hill, and it was only this time last week we were saying Tyreek Hill's been a little bit quiet, a little bit disappointing, then goes off and has an absolute monster week. So I think it just shows more than anything that in this kind of format, you've got to be a little bit patient with your lineups. That's not to say don't make any moves, don't make transfers, because transfers can benefit your lineup. But I think if I was to heed my own advice, it would be just let things play out. There's a reason why you've put certain players in your team, and 1 week does not define how they will perform for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think because we've covered this from a DFS background, we're very, very much a week by week basis, and as much as we've tried to approach this like an FPL season long game, I think it's quite hard to, because you feel like the 18. You've already said at the beginning, we're already a quarter of the way through the season, and you kind of feel a little bit of pressure because of that, I think, and it makes you want to keep changing things. But like you say, the cream is really sort of rising to the top, especially with the wide receivers and stuff, I think, which has been the big one. I think also, so I think patience is good. I think for me, it's becoming apparent now who are the enablers. I think they might. When we look at changes for the coming week, I'll probably do a little bit more about that. But I think now we've had a quarter of the season, or just under, isn't it? It's now 17-game week season. So whatever, 4/17 of the season. I think it's becoming slightly more apparent, and who I'm thinking now are the best enablers are not who I think any of us were thinking about 2 weeks ago, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's quite fair to say.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about it was, I was going to say that I don't. Although you're talking about patience, I mean, you've used your wild cards. You haven't got much choice really, but to be patient in some respects, especially with the buys coming through it up and stuff from next week, as in week 6, not this week, week 5. I think that I think once it becomes apparent who these enablers are, I think you need to just make the change and go for them and stuff. And at this point, wait until week 12 for them.
The thing is, even coming off that wildcard week, which is disappointing, and we will come to the review of our teams, Mark, but I don't have any regret about wildcarding when I did, because for me, even though I was part of the pack, if you will, and I've since drifted from the pack, this week alone has shown me how much of an impact 1 week can have on your ranking. One good week or one poor week can see you either go very north or very south in the leaderboard. And I think that's worth remembering, is whatever changes you do make, and the wildcard that I did, the players that were there for a reason. And we had 3 weeks of data up to that stage to get to that reasoning. And would I be surprised if I turned it round this week and had a good week? Absolutely not, because the players that I picked were picked with multiple games in mind. And we will come to a question a little bit further on about form and fixtures and things like that. But yeah, for me, I think I just maybe need to be a little bit more patient. And like you said, know which players to bring in at the right time, those enablers that will allow you to make the bigger moves that you need to make a week, 2 weeks further down the line. One thing I did want to point out, Mark, we're week 5, so we are fast approaching bye weeks. So anyone that is new to any kind of NFL fantasy or this season-long contest, essentially what a bye week is, and I'll describe this in FPL terms, it's a week off for teams, and it's essentially like if you're playing FPL, if you're coming at this from an FPL background, the closest similarity would be what's referred to as a blank game week for a team. That's essentially what a bye week is. Every team across the NFL will have a bye week, and it's just basically where that team has a week off. Very important period to navigate around, because bye weeks last from week 6 until week 14. So they're not going to impact us this week, but the reason that we mention it is because moving forward, you really need to start factoring these bye weeks into your plans in terms of who's in your team. Have you got multiple players that are potentially going to be on a bye week at the same time, i.e. if you have a stack? And if you can make moves to navigate from one player to another, are you leaving yourself with enough further down the line to be able to change other parts of your team. I suppose that is the beauty of having the 2 transfers. But I think between week 6 and week 14, now more than ever, is absolutely vital that you really manage that transfer allowance correctly if you are in a position where you can't use your wild card, like me, for example.
Yeah, completely. I've actually got a really good example of what you have to think about with your bye week when we look at my team for next week, or for this week, sorry, for week 5. I've got a really good example of that. You're absolutely right. Bye week is crucial now. The other thing to bear in mind is the prices are changing as well for week 6. And again, that's something to think about, because these enablers, I suspect, aren't going to be as cheap as they are right now. And therefore, it won't be the enablers anymore. Now, we don't know, because this is the first time we've had this contest. We've got no idea as to how much they're going to change the prices. We know with the sort of the football one that it's 0.1 or 0.2 if something really good has happened, but we have got no idea what the price is going to change like for this. So we'll try and get as soon as we know anything about this, we'll just post about it on Twitter and stuff, get that sort of information out.
Absolutely. It would be good if we do know anything about the price changes to actually be able to hopefully review that next week. If not next week, then we'll certainly be doing a summary of it the following week in week 7. Again, just with the bye weeks, just to go over the bye weeks so that people know exactly how they are structured. So we have them starting in week 6. We have the Atlanta Falcons, the New Orleans Saints, the New York Jets, San Francisco 49ers. So potentially straight away there in week 6, you're going to have people that own a lot of Calvin Ridley, a lot of Alvin Kamara, potentially some that have jumped onto Deebo Samuel with his impressive performances in recent weeks. You're going to have to navigate around those. Week 7, we've got the Buffalo Bills, the Dallas Cowboys, Jacksonville Jaguars, the Minnesota Vikings, Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Los Angeles Chargers. Week 7 is a massive week because it's the only week out of all the bye weeks that actually features 6 teams rested. So that's a big week to navigate around.
And there's some really good fantasy teams in there as well.
Absolutely.
Buffalo, Dallas, Minnesota, the Chargers. Yeah, 4 of those, which are, top fantasy teams.
Yep. Week 8's a little bit kinder to us. So we've got the Baltimore Ravens and the Las Vegas Raiders. Week 9, we have the Detroit Lions, Seattle Seahawks, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Washington's football team. Week 10, we have the Chicago Bears, Cincinnati Bengals, New York Giants, Houston Texans. Week 10's actually looking like the nicest week of bye weeks, I think, there, judging by those 4 teams. Week 11, we have the Denver Broncos and my Los Angeles Rams. Let's not talk about the result on Sunday. Week 12, we have the Arizona Cardinals, walked into that one, and the Kansas City Chiefs. Week 13, we have... So actually, just to point out there, week 11, week 12, there's only 4 teams across those 2 weeks on bye week. So that's not a bad period, again, to navigate through. But then to finish the bye weeks, we have 2 lots of 4. So we have week 13, the Carolina Panthers, the Browns, the Green Bay Packers, the Tennessee Titans. So again, there's potentially massive implications there in that bye week. Standout players. McCaffrey may be back by then, so there's maybe some McCaffrey in there. Sprinkle some DJ Moore, some Nick Chubb, maybe even Kareem Hunt, given the workload that he's having at the moment. Aaron Rodgers, Adams, Jones from the Titans, Derrick Henry, if you've got Julio Jones or AJ Brown at that stage. There's a lot of talent there in week 13 that will be basically sat in the stands or sat at home, as it were. Week 14, round off the bye weeks, we've got the Indianapolis Colts, the Miami Dolphins, the New England Patriots, and the Philadelphia Eagles. So very, very important to be mindful of those and really consider who's in your team. I would say, there's a lot of ways to do it, Mark, isn't there? But even if it's just as basic as write down your team, write down who's in your team at the moment, how long maybe you think that player will remain in your team if you've targeted a block of fixtures. Just have a look at who is on a bye week at what point in time. If you've got 3 or 4 in your team that are going to be sharing the same bye week, that's maybe a prime opportunity to wildcard if you can see yourself owning maybe 75% of those players up to that point. Likewise, if you go across your team and it's quite an even split, you know that as it stands right now without any changes, you probably won't have that much of a difficulty navigating through, price dependent on the players, obviously, when the price changes happen.
I'd also recommend, because you can carry forward one transfer each, so you can have 3 in a week. I'd also recommend, especially during this sort of period of bye weeks, starting from week 6, to not do any transfers unless you really need to. I wouldn't see the point in swapping, say, a defense or something like that to use up transfer. You're better keeping a transfer available so that even if you've planned really well for your bye weeks, injuries are going to come along. Yeah. So to have that extra, and don't forget, you'll only be able to have 3 transfers every 2 weeks at most, because you'd have to carry forward each, 1 week, etc. So yeah, just bear that in mind. I mean, it's I kind of see it as I kind of see it as also, this could make a case for wildcarding before all the bye weeks start as well. So you get everything lined up as you want to and stuff. But we'll, I'll talk about that again in a bit more detail and look at my next week's, my week 5 team.
One thing I do want to get off my chest, Mark, is just an apology to Alexander, the FanTeam guy out there on Twitter, who hit me up in the DMs last week asking about Cordarrelle Patterson.
Oh, no.
I'm absolutely ashamed to say that I talked you out of having Cordarrelle Patterson in your lineup, because I just did not think this kind of performance week on week was sustainable for a gadget player who's never really put this kind of performance up week in, week out in the past. But what a weapon he is turning out to be in Atlanta. I put a tweet out at the weekend that he reminds me a little bit of Percy Harvin, not in terms of quality of player, but you can employ him absolutely anywhere. You can give him reps out of the backfield. You can deploy him on sweeps. He can return kicks. He can return punts. He's a wide receiver. He can literally do everything. It's like a Swiss Army wide receiver that they've got there in Atlanta. I apologise, Alexander, the FanTeam guy, for basically talking you out of Cordarrelle Patterson. You should absolutely never listen to anything I say ever again.
Do you know, off the top of your head, how many snaps Patterson was on the field for on Sunday against Washington, percentage-wise?
I've not looked at the snap count, but if this is really low, it'll make me feel a little bit better.
It's 30%.
That does make me feel a little bit better.
So it's not like basically when he's on the field, he's being used. And I suspect, teams are going to get wiser and wiser to that and work some stuff out. I mean, he's surprised everybody, and he's surprising opposing teams as well. Having said that, I think, this might come back to haunt me, but he's not sustaining last week's performance, is he? It's really not.
It can't happen.
Exactly a hot take.
No, I mean,
he's not going to play fun. He's not going to face Washington's defense every week. So that helped.
It absolutely cannot happen. I mean, he's currently on 83.4, and if we say we're a quarter of the way through the season, then 83.4 times 4, 333 points. Now, I will tell you right now, I would bet money that Cordarrelle Patterson is not finishing this season with 333 points. What we have seen so far is absolutely not sustainable. However, one thing I will say, Mark, in his favour is he is only 10 million. So,
he is
is
for a couple of weeks.
Well, yeah, for the time being. So technically, for the time being, I guess you could call him an enabler, because for me, we've always said an enabler is 10 million or less. So I suppose you could group him into that category. He will have weeks where he might put up numbers. He will have weeks where he won't put up as many numbers. So if you're expecting the unexpected 34.6 from Cordarrelle Patterson every week, it is not going to happen. His last 3 weeks I don't think you can call them anomalies as such, because he's done it 3 weeks in a row. So he's obviously a contributor in that offense, but it's not going to be the same story week in, week out, which is exactly why I sort of tried to talk you out of it, Alexander. My sincerest apologies. You probably would have been right up there had you just gone with your gut and put Cordell Patterson in.
So Patterson was 10% owned this week, and I suspect coming into week 5, judging by the way that, say, Henry jumped up from like 22% to 51%, I reckon Patterson could easily be, maybe he'll jump all the way to 50%, maybe.
Yeah.
The thing to bear in mind, he's got a bye week the week after, so even if you're putting him in this week, you're going to be taking him out again the week after.
Yeah.
So just something to bear in mind. You might want to hold off if you want to use him as your enabler. There are other options though, which we'll discuss. But yeah, it's he's been fantastic value so far, and he kind of sticks out if you look at the top performing running backs in terms of price, because as we've said, the cream is sort of rising, and so most the top running back, well, all positions are the higher price players, and he kind of sticks out there like a sore thumb, doesn't he? At the moment?
Yes, he does.
It's funny how a team's finally found a way to use him after all these years.
We see it happen every year. We see a player who just does not look like fantasy value at all, and he moves to a team who finds a way to use him. And has it always been in the Arsenal? Maybe. Does it come down to opportunity? Does it come down to scheming offensively? Maybe.
And he's still actually his 30% snap share was his lowest of the season as well last week. So it's such a funny thing because you see a lot of content related to DFS, etc., all related around opportunities and snap counts. But he's a great example of why that doesn't always have to be important. And there's another one which I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but there's another player who's almost exactly the same. Is it Aaron Jones? It might be Aaron Jones, actually. People always say don't pick Aaron Jones because he's only on the field for like sharing half the snaps with now AJ Dillon and what was Jamal Williams previously. But he always gets the best opportunities, and that's why he's always a high scoring player.
Yeah.
And I think Cordell Patterson's showing that same sort of stuff this year.
Yeah, well, we've seen it, haven't we? He's had goal line snaps, and you would assume that Mike Davis would be the goal line back there, and he hasn't been in many scenarios. So, yes, again, apologies, Alexander, the FanTeam guy, and good evening, FF Thinker, a regular listener of the show. So thanks for joining us again this week. If you've just listened to the past 10 minutes, you're probably best tuning off, to be honest. It seems I have no idea what I'm talking about.
By the way, apologies. There's more apologies to go around because I have to apologise to you, don't I?
Yes, you do.
For the quarterback.
Yes, you do. Now, I did look at this, Mark, and I will let you off the hook a little bit because it's not as bad as I thought it was, because Josh Allen, despite his early struggles, did finish the game with 20 points. And it was Mahomes finished with 31.72. However, watching it live, it seemed like Mahomes was going to finish with about 50 points at one point. So it wasn't as big a gulf as I thought in terms of points scored. But yes, you do owe me an apology because I had not many thoughts of Josh Allen in my head until you put him there following my wildcard. And guess who I went with on my wildcard? It was, of course, Josh Allen. Was I right to do that? Well, we'll see this week. He's playing Kansas City, so we'll see this week.
I feel it's a bit unlucky because they blew out Houston, but actually at the beginning they kept getting into the red zone and even into the even closer, and they just couldn't get the ball in the end zone. Yeah, I feel like it was like he was like three touchdowns short on what he would have got on a normal week. So I mean, yeah, which is another 12 points. So like, that was a bit unfortunate. We were kind of both pretty sure on Josh Allen once we thought it through, though. And stuff.
Well, the theory was there, the fixtures were there, but
they still are.
Yeah, they are. Like I said, it could turn out that this week against Kansas City, he eclipses Patrick Mahomes. If he does, I'll come on this show next week, Mark, and say thank you very much for the Josh Allen recommendation. But until then, I'm a little bit bitter about it.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, To be honest, if I had to apologise every time I've given somebody some bad NFL advice this year, that would literally be the whole stream, and we would just introduce each other and we apologise. That would be it. Talking of which, apologies. Sean Overy's just jumped in onto the comment section, and I think he's after some explanations about Swift.
Oh yeah, some
which I think was a you thing rather than a me thing.
Well, I guess, it was. I mean, 8.9 points isn't great. There's not much I can say. There is not much I can say. What concerned me with Swift this past week was that, and I don't know if it is down to the fact that Swift is still maybe just carrying a little bit of a knock, but Jamal Williams had more carries. And I think it's the first week where that has like blatantly obviously been the case. I'm certainly not moving off Swift this week, but it's definitely something to monitor. In terms of the snaps, Swift was actually on the field 73% of his team's snaps versus Williams, who was only on for 30. So the opportunity was clearly still there. It's just for whatever reason, Swift wasn't effective whatsoever in that game this past week. But I'm not moving off him because I feel like I'd be absolutely crazy to do so, because Swift over the course of the season thus far, and this includes week 3 where he had a slightly reduced snap percentage, but he still had 65% of his team snaps from the backfield. So I'm not too concerned, and I think he's still good value. So yeah, I'm just that is all I'm clutching at the moment, is that he's going to have a turnaround week this week. He's certainly got the opportunity to do so against Minnesota, who, for all intents and purposes, there's certainly not anything to shout or write home about when it comes to defending against the run.
I just literally, sort of in the half hour before we started this show, I just read a quote from Lions offensive coordinator, which basically said the usage of Swift and Williams will be based on the general game plan, and the defenses that they're facing. So it's not something you can predict. And as we've just been talking about, Jamal Williams got more opportunities on almost half the amount of snaps and stuff. So bearing that in mind, unless one of them gets injured, I think it's always going to be like this. But what has been happening so far, and didn't happen this week, but happened before that, was Swift's been really efficient with his usage, with his touches and stuff, and his opportunities. And so I think it's a bit early to write him off. Yeah, it's just something we, like I say, just need to monitor. But the other thing to bear in mind is a lot of these quotes that come out from coordinators and head coaches are often gibberish. They're not going to tell you what they're doing, what they're really doing, and stuff. Pretty sure he actually said that Swift was going to be a lot more involved in this week 4. I'm pretty sure he said that in the week building up to it, and then he was less involved. So, they're not going to tip off the opposition. So
absolutely not. No. One thing before we do move on to the housekeeping of the show, Mark, is that we have a very exciting, shall we say contest? Yeah, we'll go with contest. A very exciting contest that we will be running a little competition for. We will give further details of that at the end of the show this evening. But what I would say is, if you are currently watching, stay tuned right through to the end, because it is a fantastic competition that we have, and it is a very exciting week on FanTeam for American football this week. This week, unlike any of the previous four that we have had thus far. So yeah, stay tuned. We've got a great competition that we will be running. We'll give you more details on that as we do work through and towards the end of the show. Before we move on to the team review, Mark, the usual bit of housekeeping for anyone that watches this show, or any 5-Yard Rush show for that matter. You will know that support for all of our podcasts is brought to you by Manscaped. The absolute best there is out there in men's below the waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision engineered tools for those all important family jewels. Now, they've recently launched the 4th generation trimmer, a lawnmower 4.0, all across Europe. Fantastic tool, fantastic features. Go and check it out at manscaped.com. We have a fantastic offer for you. 25% off. We're not that generous. 20% off and free worldwide shipping if you enter the code 5yard at manscaped.com. So get yourself over to manscaped.com. There's some fantastic products on there. This is just one of them, the Lawnmower 4.0, but 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code 5yard. Join over 2 million men worldwide who choose and trust Manscaped for their shaving needs, shall we say. We'll move on then, Mark, to the team review. So I'm happy to start with my wildcard disaster. Not many bright points to speak of. Derrick Henry had the week we all pretty much expected him to have. The downside is that Derrick Henry was 50% owned, and thus it didn't really set me apart from the rest of the field. Other than that, Josh Allen and everything else was pretty disappointing, if I'm honest. Swift, despite having plenty opportunity carries-wise, Chuba Hubbard was pretty ineffective with the work that he did have. Cooper Kupp massively on another week. Cooper Kupp scores 20+ points. Matt Stafford missed him with some big throws that usually it's laser-like accuracy, and Kupp just tucks them in his pocket. So I'm not taking anything away from that, because it wouldn't surprise me if we get another 15 to 20 points out of Cooper Kupp this week against Seattle. Just an off day, I'm putting it down to that one. Mike Williams was a little bit concerning, but when I saw the targets, it's a bit of an odd game. I think that Chargers and Raiders game, I've not seen the game myself, but when I looked at it, was basically Austin Eckler and Justin Herbert. But then when I was looking, like Jared Cook, I know had a big game. Even Keenan Allen, to be fair, didn't have an amazing game by some of the weeks that he can have his standards. So I'm not too concerned about that Mike Williams thing. Again, I think that's a bit of an outlier week when you compare it to the previous 3 weeks where he'd not scored anything less than 20. So yeah, I'm happy to sit and wait on that and see how things go there moving forward. It's an easy pivot if I do move off Mike Williams, but he's still fairly low owned at 15% as it stands. And I can't see that really increasing over this next week given the performance he's had. So potentially good differential there. Chris Godwin, 8.5. Again, disappointing, but it's a bit of a weird game, that one, I think, for Tampa Bay. Tom Brady back in New England. This week they're against Miami, who I think don't pose as big an issue for them defensively. I know Miami's defense is supposed to be lauded as this really good defense, but for me, we've not really seen it this season. And one of the strengths of the defense is the secondary, and it hasn't really performed as you'd expect. So I'm, again, not concerned about Godwin. I still think that he's going to get plenty targets, plenty receptions, plenty yards, and I've no doubt he'll find his way into the end zone as well going forward. There is a reason why I picked these players, and that is what I need to remind myself of. When you look at the games coming up for someone like Chris Godwin, Dolphins, Eagles, Bears, Saints, Washington, Giants, Colts, he's got such a good run of games there. So he's staying in my team, certainly for the time being. TJ Hawkinson. I wish I'd have taken your advice on this one, Mark.
Should have listened to that rather than Josh Allen.
I mean, we've got a 25 and a 20 in the first 2 weeks, and since then we've had a 3 and an 8.
It's what he does. It's what he does. He'll be back though this week. Maybe he'll do well again.
That is the thing. I'm clinging to that because again, he's got Minnesota this week, who they've been fantastic offensively, but I don't think they've been particularly great defensively this season thus far. So it wouldn't surprise me if he bounces back with 80 yards and a score this weekend on 5 or 6 receptions. I suspect it will be a game that, well, for me, I think Minnesota will win that game. So the game script should lend to a productive afternoon for Hawkinson, but we will see. Again, I've only just wildcarded this team, Mark. So despite a low scoring week and despite a big drop off in my overall rank, I don't want to get too drastic and too desperate with it at this stage because we're only a quarter of the way through the season. And I think the theory as to why these players were picked still stands 1 week later.
Yeah, no, completely. And last week showed you just need one really good week, and you I think the team which I've got currently 106th, I think was in the 400s or something like that. And it's not even like I was I can't remember, I was in like the top 100 for the week or something like that. So you can move up pretty quickly. Move up. Anyway, let me just quickly go do mine. We've got a lot to get through still tonight, haven't we? Okay, there we go. Henry did well for me again. Josh Allen was okay. You can see why this team dropped down because a little bit like yours, Nick. There's no sort of outstanding performances when you've got players scoring like we've already mentioned: Hill, Patterson, Samuel. Not having those players, you're going to end up dropping back. Osborne and Rondale Moore both had very. Neither of them were involved particularly. The whole Minnesota game was a big disappointment for me. In my general DFS play, I'd hammered that game thinking it was going to shoot out, and then it was one of the lowest scoring of the day, if not the lowest scoring. So that was unfortunate. And like I say about Cup, he could have had 2 touchdowns, another 2 touchdowns easily. Not really worried about him. Ridley showed a little bit of life. Finally, but again, you can't play Washington every week. So if you've got Patterson getting 3 touchdowns and stuff, it's not leaving loads to go around. And Darren Waller actually did all right. Really, he was one of my better scorers. So so a very average week, but because of the and it was literally an average week in terms of where it came rankings wise for game week 4, because there was so many high scores. From other players, the team dropped down. So about 333 now.
I wish that was where I was. I'm certainly a bit lower, but in terms of changes that I will be making to my lineup this week, Mark, given that I am coming off a wild card, there isn't really much in the way of changes. And one of the things that I picked up on that you mentioned earlier in the show was you wouldn't necessarily use a transfer on a defense. There is one reason and one reason only that I am transferring a defense out and in this week. And that is because coming off the back of a wild card, I have 2 transfers to use. I am not going to rip up this team. I've put this template together for a reason. I'm going to trust why I've put that together. But I can only carry 1 transfer over to next week for when the bye weeks start. So for me, the only part of my team that I'm happy to change this week without being impatient is the defense, which was the Bengals, and it will be the Las Vegas Raiders, I think, this week. The reason for that is the Bengals are hosting the Packers and the Raiders are hosting the Bears. I think the Bears pose less of a problem than the Packers do for the Bengals. I think with the Bears, we've seen struggles from Justin Fields. David Montgomery is now out for the same 4 to 5 weeks. And I think actually playing in Las Vegas I think it's a different prospect. They're a lively fan base, the Raider Nation. They really get behind the team. And it's almost like that sort of that 12th man in Seattle kind of thing. Not maybe to the same effect in Las Vegas, but I'd rather see my defense at home hosting the Bears than hosting the Packers, who seem to have turned a corner after the week one disappointment at the Saints. So that is the only move. And as I said, Mark, I'm only using, I would not normally do a transfer on a defense. As you can see, I'm pivoting from one 9 million defense to another. I'm only using that move because I can only carry forward one transfer next week. So I will have 3 transfers next week for the start of the bye weeks to start my planning on what moves I make going forward then.
Actually, it's really good you brought this up, because actually that's a good point to make. When I was talking about the defenses, I did mean at the expense of carrying forward a transfer. So
yeah,
that's absolutely fine. Yeah, I get it. That's a really good point. Okay.
So not much has changed for me, Mark, but I certainly know it is doing for yourself.
It is, because although I said I would never do this, I'm going to wildcard this week. And there's a couple of reasons for it. I think the main one being, when I started doing transfers, I just wasn't happy with anything I could create with 2 transfers. I just wasn't happy with how things were looking. The other thing is, because the prices are going to change, I wanted to get in one particular player, and I'll start with him first. Tight end Dalton Schultz and 9.5 million is starting to look like the bargain of the season almost. The Dallas, whilst Prescott is fit, that Dallas team is just fantasy points. That's all it is. It's just it's not always going where you expect it to go. Like CeeDee Lamb had a terrible week this week, but Schultz has been pretty consistent. Now, before the season started, I thought Blake Jarwin was going to be the number 1 guy, and he did get a touchdown and did quite well. But actually, on a week when, say, CeeDee Lamb doesn't do that well, they're easily able to sustain 2 tight ends. So, yeah, but 9.5 million, I think, is a great enabler and gets me a piece of that really high-octane Dallas offense.
We mentioned Schultz last week, Mark, didn't we, as someone that we had our eye on. And there's 2 tight ends that I have my eye on at the moment as an enabler. And one is absolutely Dalton Schultz, who has just come off 79% of the offensive snaps this week. The other one's Dawson Knox at 81%. There's so many similarities between the 2. In terms of the actual snaps, Dalton Schultz had 203, Dawson Knox 222. Which equates to just under 74% of his team snaps offensively for Dawson Knox versus just under 72% for Dalton Schultz. There's 0.5 between them in the pricing. At some point, there's $1 million between them, should I say. At some point, I can imagine during the navigation of bye weeks, and if TJ Hawkinson doesn't pull his finger out and find his form from week 1 and 2, then I will absolutely be using the tight end position as my enabler position because of the variance that we get from that position week to week. I think it's the sensible option to use that position as an enabler, because if that position, we've said it before in DFS, Mark, haven't we? If that position doesn't perform, you're not too disappointed by it because you're not expecting much from it anyway.
Yeah, and it's actually, when you look at the sort of points he scored, comparison with Kelsey, and you look at the price difference, etc., and even Darren Waller, who I had in, who I've taken out after I think I've left him in for like a week. He's not done badly or anything, but the savings are just I can't turn them down, and it's allowed me to create a really strong
the receiving core. Wow.
Yeah. So obviously Cooper Kupp has been in since the beginning for me, so that's staying. We've talked a little bit about Mike Williams. I think yesterday's his low score was really as much as the game script went. They got out to this 21-0 lead and stuff, and I'm not particularly worried about him. Tyreek Hill speaks for himself. He's one of those which, I think most people probably wanted to get in from the beginning of the season, but he was quite prohibitive price-wise, but until we'd identified enablers. But DJ Moore, just want to quickly talk about him. Carolina have been bit of a revelation anyway from a fantasy points sort of aspect. Sam Darnold looks like he's found his home. He's nice and comfortable. He's got the most rushing touchdowns on the year.
Ranked 5 in the quarterbacks as well.
Yeah, and but going into that game against Dallas, the narrative was that DJ Moore was going to be shut down by Trayvon Diggs because Diggs had shut down the number one corners, wide receivers the previous 3 weeks, and everyone was starting saying he was a superstar cornerback and all that, which may well still be true. But Carolina were inventive enough and DJ Moore was talented enough that didn't actually make any difference to them. And actually, Robbie Anderson seems to be the one missing out at the moment. The big pass catches. So it seems like the offense is just going through DJ Moore, and he's a great price. And again, I'm not necessarily expecting him to score as much as he did every week, but I think I just want a piece of that Carolina offense, which is kind of something I've done a little bit here. I've been, I say with Schultz, I wanted a bit of Dallas, I wanted a bit of Carolina. You always want a bit of Kansas City, and also the Chargers have been great as well. So yeah, and obviously the Rams already had, but yeah, I think DJ Moore is on the way up. I really do. So he was obvious. Now the one which is probably going to surprise you a little bit is Gainwell at 9.5. He might not stay before Thursday. He's in there now. The reason being, I could put Patterson in because there's definitely enough money to have Patterson in. But I've two things. One, as I said already, he's got a bye week after this week, so I'd be putting him in, take him out again. The other thing is I've got to catch up with people. I think Patterson's going to become very chalky this week. So Gainwell actually had more snaps than Patterson. Not that that's that important. But what I've seen of him as the weeks go on is I just think to the eye he looks like he's just getting better and better. And I just think it's very likely that Philadelphia are going to start using him more and more. He had 6 catches last week, which is obviously receiver style usage. And he's currently 0% owned, which I'm guessing means anything under 0.5%. So if I want to catch up, he's possibly a good way of doing so. So him and Schultz are kind of who I'm using at the moment as enablers. There's one other option really under that you can afford under 10 million running back wise at the moment, and that would be Damian Williams of Chicago, because he's going to pretty much get the lion's share of the load for the next 4 or 5 weeks whilst Montgomery's injured. Other than that, it's all a bit of a guess really, isn't it? It's Elijah Mitchell could come back and do well for the 49ers, but we just don't know. That backfield's so random. Tyson Williams, he's kind of vanished now, hasn't he? So there you go. That's what I'm going with at the moment, Gainwell. I might change it to Damian Williams before Thursday. Not too sure.
Yeah, the Tyson Williams one is strange because he was far and away the best performing back in Baltimore, and for some reason they just decided to not use him this week, which the Baltimore fans are not happy with on social media. I think I like what I'm seeing from Gainwell. The only concern, I suppose, will be the snap percentage, the snap count. But as we've discussed throughout this show, Mark, I suppose it's what these players are doing with the opportunities that are being presented to them. And Gainwell seems to be one of the backs that is really taking advantage of the time that he's spending on the field. And I mean, I personally rate Miles Sanders. I think he is he's a good running back. I think I'd certainly have him in my top. I'd probably just about squeeze him into my top 15. I would say in the league. If not, he'd certainly be in my top 20. Which is nothing to. It's certainly nothing to sort of turn your nose up at. But yeah, 9.5 for Gainwell. If he carries on at the rate he is doing, and if he does see an increase in snap percentage, then which he has done in his most recent week, 39% is his highest on the season so far. But 39% is not bad at all for a 9.5 running back.
I think the point for me on this situation is, though, I'm not. If I was trying to score just the most raw points, Gainwell wouldn't necessarily be the player.
Yeah,
it's because I'm trying to catch up.
Yes,
that's what it is, and because he's nothing percent owned, and I don't think particularly many people are gonna bring him in this week because Patterson's there at the same price.
Yeah,
but then a lot of people are then going to realise, I've got to take him out again the following week, and
I suppose as well because of his price mark, it's like a price per million. He's probably performing quite well at the moment because of how cheap he is, but how productive he's becoming. And I suppose the actual opportunity share isn't bad on paper when you look at it either. I know that this isn't a huge direct comparison, but you look at Kareem Hunt has had 125 offensive snaps this year. Gainwell's had 91. And Gainwell's quite a bit cheaper than Kareem Hunt. So it's not to say that we're going to be getting Kareem Hunt numbers because we're not. But like you said, given that his ownership is next to nothing and given that he does fall under that 10 million enabler bracket, I like it. Absolutely.
The other thing is I'm liking the Philadelphia offense from a fantasy point of view as well.
Yeah.
It's definitely better than I think we thought it was going to be. There's lots of pieces around there, but it's all about the price. Now, if somebody else turns up who's also equally as low owned and looks like they've got some potential at some point for a good run for a few weeks, then I will choose them. I think Damian Williams will be if people aren't picking Patterson this week, then Damian Williams will probably be the obvious pivot. And I still might go that way because I don't think he's going to be that owned. But at the moment, as things stand now, it will be Gainwell. Yeah,
I think Damian Williams is definitely the other one to consider at the price range. The opportunity has opened up with David Montgomery going down, and you're at least getting, it seems, 4 to 5 weeks of Damian Williams, which that's not a bad period of time really to bring someone in. It's the kind of reasoning that led me to Chuba Hubbard. Now, McCaffrey might be back in another week or two, and certainly not a long-term stay or fixture in the team. Chicago's bye week comes in week 10. So you're getting 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 out of Damian Williams potentially. I would have thought maybe, unless Montgomery's injury is something he can shake in the next 2 to 3 weeks, that they maybe don't risk him until after the bye week. So you're potentially getting up to Chicago's bye week out of Damian Williams before you have to then worry about transferring him out. So I think you're onto a bit of a winner either way there, because I do agree with you. I think he'll be low owned as well.
Yeah. The only thing about Chicago is Tariq Cohen, I think, is eligible to come back week 7 if he's fit of the PUP list. So the other thing I wanted to talk about this lineup, which actually links to what we were talking about earlier with buys, is there's 3 players in that lineup who have got a week 7 buy, which is Schultz, Williams, and Allen. Now, it's quite easy to save a transfer and change all them for week 7, but then you couldn't bring them all back in 1 week because you wouldn't have 3 transfers for week 8 because you've used 3 in week 7. So just something to bear in mind. It's easy to get them out, but to put the players back in again, if you've had to do a 3 transfer week, it's going to take you 2 weeks, or you just plan a little bit easier. So plan around it. So that's something I've got to work out. I've got to look at the fixtures, how they look for next week, week 6, and how they look for week 8, and work out where I'm going to make that change.
Yeah. I mean, Josh Allen, for example, there, Mark, what I was going to say is, are you planning to approach the transferring of those 3 players you've just mentioned now that you've used your wildcard? Are you planning to approach it on a week-by-week basis? Because I know with Josh Allen, I'd looked at his next few games, but maybe overlooked the fact that he does have a bye week in week 7. So actually, week 7 onwards, Josh Allen probably finds himself out of my team. Well, he obviously would find himself out of my team. I can't afford not to have a quarterback starting 1 week. With that said, from week 7 onwards, as I pointed out last week, Kyler Murray has a really nice run of fixtures from that point. So as long as you're forward planning with these kind of things, it's easy to tackle the bye weeks. You've just really got to look at blocks of fixtures.
Yeah, and I think for me, the decision on week 8, what I'll do will all come down to ownership. I think whoever's lower owned out of Allen and Murray. So I think at the moment that will be Murray. I think Allen will be the lower owned out of those two.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we spoke, we didn't really expect Murray to do anything this week because against the much vaunted Rams defense, we weren't expecting to do anything, and he just had his way. And it surprised me. I took him out specifically because I thought he had a hard matchup and Allen had an easy matchup.
Yeah.
Now, the point difference actually wasn't that much in the end. Murray, I think, ended up with like 23 or 24 points on FanTeam. So it wasn't too bad. But yeah, I think he's possibly more matchup proof than we gave him credit last week.
Yeah. Seems that way. Seems like he's in for an MVP season. But yeah, really like that, Mark. Not a lot there that I would disagree with at all. And the wide receiver core is obviously the strength of the team, which is fantastic. And we know that the receivers do score well in this format. We said that from day one.
Indeed.
We've got a couple of listener questions, Mark, haven't we, to go through before we finish off with the final encore, which is the competition that we're going to be running. So the questions that we've had have come through on Twitter, I believe.
Yep. So from Paul Cartwright at Hosfit, we've got best tight end and running back for the season, and also wide receiver, as mine not scoring much, especially Williams with 0 points. I don't know which Williams that is. So yeah, tight end. I think tight end we've already answered. I think value for money wise, Schultz. I would say.
Yeah, I think if you're going for a season keeper now, I think then obviously bear in mind the bye weeks, but I think Schultz or Knox, I think are both great value at that position given the price.
Yeah. Running back, I still think you can't go very wrong with Derrick Henry if you've got the money and stuff. He's getting as much usage as he ever was. I mean, Austin Eckler's having a fantastic season as well, isn't he?
And that is someone that we mentioned last week as a differential move. If you didn't want to go McCaffrey to Henry, which was the obvious move, that Austin Eckler was the other move that we would have considered. So I think I'm with you, Mark. If you're keeping someone for a season, Derrick Henry, that offense is built around him. And they've got issues at the moment with the receivers. Not many of them are fit and healthy. So start up Derrick Henry every week. He's got another fantastic opportunity this week to put points on the board against the Jags. So I would go with Henry as well. I don't even think once McCaffrey is fit and healthy and back, I don't even think I'll go there, to be honest. I think he can be covered elsewhere, McCaffrey. So Henry, or I think Zeke Elliott, I think, is quietly having quite a good season. And I think he benefits from having Dak Prescott back.
Yeah.
And that's someone I'll be looking at in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, and Saquon Barkley is coming back and looking like his old self as well. So he's another one to bear in mind. They're both expensive. But Zeke has some fantastic stats in terms of when Prescott's there in the last year. To being RB in RB1, RB6 and stuff and all that. He's got some fantastic stats. And wide receiver, it's hard to just pick one wide receiver that you would say is the best for the rest of the season. Really is hard.
Yeah, I think I am still on the Cooper Kupp train on that one. I think if you haven't got Kupp in your lineup, I still think he presents the best value over the course of the season, priced at 16. One who is emerging week on week, and he's certainly not the forgotten man, but I think we don't talk about him as much because we are used to poor quarterback playing Washington, but Terry McLaurin looks like he is quarterback proof at the moment. And
4% owned as well.
4% owned, 17 million. And the divisional games he plays against the Cowboys, the Eagles, and the Giants, I think are quite friendly defenses. So in terms of the points that can be put up. We've seen it. So I think that's someone who I would also be considering if I was keeping someone over the course of a season. But I don't think I'd spend the extra million on McLaurin if I didn't have Cup. If I had Cup, I'd be looking at 16 million keeping for the season.
I think also Heineke's done fantastic. He's on the lead, the front page. He's only played 3 games, and he's only 8.5 million. So if you're going to get him in, you want to get him in before the price changes. My top team is a Heineke team. He's been fantastic so far, which, we said keep an eye, see how he looks, but he's scored, over 20 points in the last 3 weeks, which 8.5 million probably makes it. Does that make him the best value of any player? Possibly.
I think it probably does.
I think it does, doesn't it? Yeah. We probably don't talk about him enough, to be honest with you. It's and he's also perfected the old pylon dive as well. So he's
he's 0.3 points away from Justin Herbert kinds of output, and he cost 10 million less. He's absolutely the bargain of the season thus far. It's just how long you can feel confident with Tyler Heineke at quarterback for 8.5 million.
Sorry, I'm just going to see what his ownership was.
Must be low.
10%.
Must be. Still quite low.
I still think that's low when you consider it allows you to pretty much pay up everywhere else. McLaurin's actually a great shout because he's actually working his way up, isn't he? If you're looking for somebody to sort of start overtaking and catching up with people, McLaurin at 4% is a great option. But again, Washington don't always get to play Atlanta every week, so
true.
We got playing the Saints this week. We want exactly a tough defense. Anyway, so hopefully that answers Paul's questions. Who else we got? Fantasy Menace at Menace Fantasy says, which of fixtures or form do you consider the most important in this type of season-long NFL PPR contest?
See, for me, Mark, it is definitely a combination of both because I have approached this game very similar to how I would approach any season game. I always draw comparisons to FPL, and in FPL, I think if you're bringing a player in, it's vitally important that you are looking at fixtures so that you can capitalize on a run of games. But I think because the season is shorter in the NFL than it is in the Premier League, much shorter for that matter, I don't think fixtures are quite as important, especially when you're looking at the top players, because what you tend to find in NFL fantasy is, Derrick Henry, for example, you won't find Derrick Henry in the top 3 last season and then fall out of the top 10 this season. He'll still be there or thereabouts. So the cream always tends to rise, which is where the form comes into it. Even where you have your off weeks, Cooper Kupp this week, for example, you're still going to have lots of peak weeks with Cooper Kupp and lots of consistency. So though I think fixtures is important, if you're looking to bring in a player, we'll use David Montgomery as an example, actually, Mark, because he had a really strong finish to last season. The season before, Tyler Higbee had a really strong finish, if you remember. He was one of the top scoring tight ends to finish the season. So you can target certain spells of games where a player will come up against teams that they're just not very good at defending that kind of position. And there's sites out there that will tell you that. If you actually just play fantasy football, most of your fantasy apps will tell you the strength of schedule based on a running back, the rush defenses that they're coming up against, or a quarterback. Are they coming up against a stern pass defense, or are they coming up against a defense that gives up a lot of points? So there are sites out there. There's a lot of different fantasy formats that will tell you about strength of schedule. Some more comprehensive than others. Some will give you numbers. Some will just do a bit of a traffic light system, green, red, amber, depending on strength of schedule and difficulty. But I think a short answer to that question, I feel like I've rambled a little bit there, but the short answer to that question, in my opinion, is They're both important, but because it is a short season, I think you can get away with backing a player's form and how you think they will perform versus the fixtures. I think you can have, Cooper Cups against Seattle this week. Seattle are a good team, but you're not going to be surprised if Cooper Cup catches 6 out of 8 targets, puts up 94 yards and scores a touchdown. So I think you've just got to bear that in mind if you are going to target a run of games. Don't look too far ahead in a season-long contest that is 17 weeks like this one.
I think the top players, you're going to pick them no matter what. I don't think they're matchup proof, the top players. You're not, anybody who, hats off if you can pick the weeks when Tyreek Hill's going to get his 50 points and you can then pick the weeks where he's getting his 8 or 9 points and stuff. Hats off to you. Over the season, that sort of should level out. I think when you're looking at cheaper players and you're looking at sort of temporary transfers and stuff then I think form is far more important than fixtures. As just, the example I gave about DJ Moore and stuff, if you looked at the fixture and everything, you wouldn't play DJ Moore this week because he was going to allegedly be shadowed by Diggs and he was going to be, taken out the game. The problem is, if you're not in the room with the offensive coordinator when they create the game plan, and you're not in the room with the defensive coordinator when they create their game plan, you don't really know what's going to happen. And so I think form is most important there, more important there. The fixtures thing, I think, is good for a tiebreaker. We had a little bit of it. We're talking last week about Allen and Kyler Murray. Happened to kind of get it slightly wrong, but it was still a tiebreaker for us. So
yeah. I think one important thing to mention, Mark, with the fixtures is if you are looking at fixtures, don't look at a fixture and think that team is playing the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals are the only unbeaten team in the league, so that is a really difficult fixture, and I can't really pick or play anyone that's playing against that defense. Don't approach it like that. Actually look into a team's defense and look into where points are scored on that defense. So how are they against quarterbacks? How many points do they give up against wide receivers? How many points do they give up against running backs? Tight ends. We've seen teams in previous seasons that have given up 13, 14, 15 touchdowns to tight ends, and it's a position we don't particularly like talking about or owning, but there's ways that you can target a defense. And the reason I'm saying that is, likes of Arizona looked a really good defense this past week against the Rams, but then you look at the rushing stats and the Rams almost beat themselves to a point because they stopped running the ball, but were running it really efficiently. So if you're looking at fixtures, don't look at Arizona and think, oh my God, the number one power ranked team in the NFL. Look at them and think, well, I'm picking a running back here, and there's a chance that running back is going to score well. One thing I would say on the flip side of that coin is just consider the game script as well, whether you think that team's going to be in that game. And if you're then picking a running back who has a tough game, is he going to be used less because the team he's on is then chasing the score?
Yeah. And the other side of this is I don't really think especially during the bye week period, that you're going to be pretty lucky if you can pick and choose players without and not being affected by injuries. Which on top of your bye weeks mean you run out of transfers. So I think form is everything towards the end of the season. We mentioned the David Montgomery example last year. I think it's going to be everything towards the end of the season, the form side of it, and obviously injuries play a big part in that. So yeah. For me, the fixtures aren't that important. They're only in a tiebreaker situation.
Yeah. Thanks very much for the questions, guys. Keep them coming in. Obviously, we'll answer those every week. Moving on then to the encore of the pod. So before we do, just want to give a shout out to Dream Sport, Mark. I know you've had a nice, successful weekend on Dream Sport, haven't you? For anyone that is playing the weekly contests, so FanTeam run the Weekly Monster. Well, I call it the Weekly Monster. That's the EPL version. They run the Red Zone slate at 6 p.m. and then they run the Sunday Fumble, which is the 9 p.m. slot of games. In between, then you get the Thursday night showdown, you got the Monday night showdown, and the late game on Sunday this past week as well, which was the Bucks and the Patriots. So if you are playing those on FanTeam, you go and play them on Dream Sport as well, because there's some fantastic prizes still to be won. I think you won a ticket for the Red Zone contest, didn't you, Mark, this week?
No, for the week, no, because this week is the new Monster NFL Monster contest, which is all the Sunday games.
Course,
yeah, and so I've won a ticket for that.
Yeah.
On Dream Sport. And Dream Sport's free to enter and free to play.
Well, there you won that free of charge.
Yep.
So go and sign yourself up to Dream Sport. All the contests to enter on there are free. The currency that you acquire on there, you acquire it daily. It is free currency. You just need to log on and claim it. But what you can actually win, it could equate to monetary prizes or certainly entrance into contests, which brings us nicely onto the competition, Mark. So anyone who doesn't know or hasn't heard, FanTeam are running a Week 5 Monster, which is a little bit different to what they've run in previous weeks. So in previous weeks, we have had the Red Zone slate, we've had the Sunday Fumble. The Monster, Mark, I'm assuming, is going to be every single game on that Sunday.
Yeah, including the night game.
Including the night game. So
keep some players back for that.
The difference here then is that you're going to be targeting more games, picking your lineups and getting your stacks right is going to be more important than it probably has been on previous weeks, because the variance over the course of Sunday from 6 o'clock to the late games is going to be massive. So there's going to be a lot of lineup differentiation, but bringing it back to the competition, why you tuned in, we are giving away 2 free tickets, and that is 1 ticket per person. So you can't win both tickets, unfortunately. But we will be running a random draw contest. How we'll do the draw, we've not yet established. It depends on entrance. But we will run a contest whereby 2 random listeners will acquire a free ticket for the Sunday Red Zone Monster, and it will be the mid-entry price. So you'll get a ticket for the 20,000 contest.
The €20,000 prize pool, which is a fantastic price for an NFL contest.
It is, and it's the biggest by far that we've had thus far into the season. And these contests are filling almost every week now. It is becoming more and more popular. So 2 free tickets to be in with a chance of winning one of those tickets. Myself and Mark are asking you to DM us on Twitter. So you've got @NickOfWigan, or where can the listeners find yourself, Mark?
@_SMRF.
So we are asking you to DM us on Twitter with your answer to this question. So the question is, myself and Mark, since we've been doing this season-long contest, we have both owned the same tight end at one point in time. Who is that tight end? So since the start of the season-long contest, myself and Mark, at some point in time, have owned the same tight end. Who is that tight end? If you can DM us with the name of that tight end, you will win 1 free entrant into the random prize draw, and we will select 2 winners from that random prize draw. The competition will close at midnight on Friday, so you have until then to either watch this show back or to listen to our pod and get your DM over to us. If it comes in after midnight on Friday, I'm really sorry, but you will not be in that draw. We will do the draw on Saturday, and we will let the winners know who they are, so that you have plenty of time to plan and get your team in before the start of the contest at 6 o'clock on Sunday. But fantastic competition, Mark. Thrilled that we're able to give these 2 tickets away. We'll certainly be entering it ourselves.
We're asking for DMs so that it's listeners of the show who actually enter this, rather than asking you to reply on Twitter or something. So
Yeah.
only if you've listened to this show or you've listened earlier. I'm not giving away too much to say that we have already mentioned the answer to the quiz today. Yeah, so we're hoping to be regular listeners who enter the competition. So
we've tried to be quite subtle with it as well, Mark, haven't we? That we've not given too much away on socials because we want regular listeners to the show to have every chance of winning this fantastic prize. Yeah. We don't want every sort of Joe Blogs off the street entering. We want our regular listeners, our regular contributors, to have a chance of winning this ticket. So DM us once again that question for a free entrance into the random prize draw. Draw will commence on Saturday. You will have until midnight on Friday going into Saturday to then get the answer into us. But the question is, me and Mark have owned the same tight end during this season-long contest at some point in time. Who is that tight end that we have both owned? DM us your answer, and we will announce the winners on Saturday with the live draw. We'll either put a video up or a screenshot of the person that has actually won the draw.
And you can DM either of us. It doesn't have to be both of us. It doesn't matter. Just DM either of one of us. Doesn't matter. And in earlier weeks, we've talked about this player quite extensively.
Oh, he has been discussed. Absolutely. And I'm sure he'll be discussed again in the future as well. But he has definitely been mentioned. So if you've listened to previous shows, you've absolutely got a one-up. You won't need to go back and listen. You will definitely know who this player is. That rounds us off, Mark. So week 5 is almost upon us. Make sure you lock your lineup in before Thursday, as that is the deadline. Any parting comments for the listeners, Mark?
No, I mean, I think we've covered it. We've covered a lot there tonight. I think with the changes, just think about what you're doing with the changes of price coming up next week. And if you're inclined to use a wild card, I would say go for it.
Yeah,
but if you don't need to, then keep it till after all the bye weeks.
Definitely. We will sign off with another line from Pitsy. I really like this one. He actually sent me one that I had to I couldn't include it because, we maybe we'll include that on a later week, but certainly not this week.
Maybe you can send it to me on a week you can't make or something.
Yeah,
because of baby stuff.
Definitely one I want you to cover off. But this is actually my favourite so far from Pitsy. So if you need anything at all, give us a shout. We are on Twitter at Nick of Wigan, at SMRF. So give us a shout. But for now, I'm Nick. This is Mark. And we are out.